Today's lessons will deal with digital noise and sharpening. Noise and sharpening kind of work as a team, and you have to consider each of them when talking about the other. So we're going to start out with the topic of digital noise. There's a handout I've included which says when and what is digital noise. It's a pretty complete discussion of the subject, and I encourage you to read it to get a little better understanding. But basically, those of us who reach back into the era of film photography will know about film grain. Whenever we bought film of the higher ISO, we also had a grainier resulting picture. When we moved into the realm of digital, the concept is called noise, and it's related to the ratio of the signal coming into your camera and its noise. The higher the power of the signal you're receiving, the less noise will be prominent. And this is why on a bright day with a well-exposed image, the signal is so strong that noise is not a problem. When you get into a low light situation such as night or evening or sunrise, you normally raise the ISO on your camera to get more light. And whenever you do that, that signal to noise ratio goes down and noise can become a problem. There's no absolute answer to it. You have to look at the camera that you're using, and you can do some test shots where you take an average indoor shot with flash and you take the picture on a program mode that is simply, you're not going to fool around getting the same exposure. P is program will work fine. You set the ISO to 100 or the lowest it will go, and you take the shot, and then you simply raise the ISO, keep everything else the same, and take another shot. And the camera will work to keep your exposure the same, but how that exposure is achieved will be in many cases the result of the ISO you're changing. And then after, if you take those images into your computer and look at them with software such as one of the Adobe products and zoom in to 100% at least and compare side by side, you'll find out at what point in your camera the noise becomes so heavy that it's going to be hard to deal with. And it will vary. And the newer your camera is, the higher you'll go without getting into too much noise. They simply have improved the sensors that go into digital cameras. But if you know that you can get a fine picture at 800 or 1000 or at 1600, then you're free to use that on your normal photographic outings. If you discover that your camera can't go over 400 without having an unacceptable amount of noise, you'll have to bring a tripod and set your camera with a lower ISO for a longer exposure. It's a case of knowing your own equipment and what will work. But no matter what you do, there will be images that you would like to reduce the noise in. And so I'm going to discuss two methods. There certainly are others. If you have an image where you're saving it to your disk in RAW format, you obviously will want to work with Adobe Camera Raw's tools while you still have digital information. A RAW file does not have any pixels yet. It's simply those ones and zeros we know of in electronic terms. And you can make changes there and have less damage. Whereas if you have a JPEG, you can still go into Camera Raw, but you will be adjusting pixels already. And of course, if that's what you're dealing with, you still have to deal with noise. But I will show you two methods. And the first one is going and using the tools in Adobe Camera Raw. So let's go ahead. Your software is open, and you're going to go in the editor to File, Open, or if you are lucky enough to have a version of Photoshop Elements that says Open in Camera Raw, you can always use that when that's where you want to end up. For this time, we're going to actually open a RAW file, so it knows enough to go into ACR. So just say File, Open. You'll find one RAW file, Keto 2731.cr2, and that is one of Canon's RAW formats. So just highlight it and click Open, and it will come open to you in the tools for Adobe Camera Raw. If you're doing all this work in Lightroom, you simply will open that tool in the Develop module of Lightroom, and you will find the same Camera Raw tools, including the options to work with digital noise. And you'll probably have some additional options that you can use. I'm going to look at this image first in terms of how it was captured. It was a challenging picture because of the bright lights coming from the tower and some of the spots. This is a hill in Quito, Ecuador, and it had very dark areas also. So in order not to overexpose the brights, I had to leave the darks really underexposed. And so whatever noise there is in this picture is going to be accentuated, because when you lighten the shadows, noise hiding there becomes more noticeable. So it's a time to think about it. This was taken a long time ago. If I had been working with HDR, dynamic range images, I would have known enough to go on a tripod and take several exposures of this image. And therefore, I wouldn't have to deal with one exposure with a lot of noise in very dark shadows. So all I'm going to do, I don't want to change the highlights. They're fine. I'm going to take the blacks first. The black slider will take the pixels that are right backed up against the left edge and spread those out a bit. Now I want you to know I don't care for much detail in that foreground, so I'm just wanting to get rid of the most serious underexposure. So I bring that over until I see all those blue marks, incidentally, were an indication of underexposure. And the reason I see them is that the little triangle at the top left hand of my histogram has a clipping warning, and I have mine turned on. If I turned it off, those warning lights would disappear. So when you use the software, it's a good idea to have both corners turned on, and the right one will warn you of overexposed pixels by turning them red, and the left warning will warn you of underexposed pixels by turning them bright blue. That was why mine were blue. So let's go back to the blacks, and let's move them just till that warning ends, just to get rid of the very, very darkest of them. If I would like a little more light back here in the hill, I want to lighten the shadows. So I will go and lighten the shadows till I think I have enough light coming from the shadow area. And when I'm in doubt, I go into the percentage in the lower left-hand corner, and I say, let me see this picture at 100%. Now, in 100%, you see I still have underexposure. If I want to work with it, I go back to the blacks, and I go a little further with that till those disappear in the process. If I look at them, if they're not extremely intense, I'm not going to worry about them. And if I'm tired at looking at the blue and it interferes with my looking at my picture, I can turn off the clipping warning so it doesn't bother me. I now can look through the rest of the scene and see whether I think there's enough exposure. So if you hold your space bar at any time in Adobe software, you will get the hand tool, which allows you to drag the picture around. So I'm pulling it around, and you can certainly see the noise that's there. So I have to decide, do I need to lighten the shadows that much? Because I accentuate the noise when I lighten the shadows. Let's see what happens when I reduce those a little. Oh, look at that. I might be willing to give up some detail on the hillside at this point in order to not magnify the noise. So the more I lighten noisy shadows, the more obvious the noise becomes. And I saw that noise when I was looking at the picture. When I lightened it more, I could see all the horrible area in the light shadows that was full of texture. That was texture that was not in the scene. So I'm not going to spend much time on this. I simply want to get this picture back to the point where it's reasonably exposed for the purposes I want to use. And then if I want to see the whole scene again, I go back to that percentage box, and if I pop it open, I can say fit in view, and I'll see my entire image. There's one other problem this image has, and that is that the horizontal horizon isn't straight. Can you see this green part here? That's the most obvious horizon line. And so I like to fix that right away. So I go up to the tools provided at the top of Adobe Camera Raw's window, and I grab the one which, when it point to it, says Straighten tool. And when I take it, I draw along something which should be straight, which is this top green bar. I start drawing my mouse and I stay on the green bar. I lift my hand and it turns the picture to straighten it. And then if I want to make that straighten permanent, I go up to the hand tool at the top. If I click it, it turns my image. If I think it's not straight enough, I can do it again. That's how you straighten while you're in Adobe Camera Raw. To me, more important than that is how straight the tower looks. And that vertical looks pretty straight to me. Look over here. That building looks pretty straight. So, you know, we can always be a little skew because of the angle that we approach the picture. If I need a final adjustment to make it a little bit better, I can do the final adjustment in the editor using the transform tools. And that will allow me to lift the left corner of this picture just a little bit up to straighten that out. For now, we're interested in how to get rid of the noise that's in this picture. So the controls for noise in Adobe Camera Raw or in the Lightroom Develop module have the appearance of two pyramids, one behind the other, and when you point, it says these are the detail tabs. So I click on the detail tab, and I have mine set so in the noise reduction area, all of the sliders are back at the left, they're all zeros. If you have the default that Adobe has, you might have a color set at 25, and if you would like to see it for yourself, you could always draw it to the back. But generally speaking, if the default is set at 25 in color with a 50 for color detail, I generally leave that and don't change it unless I have an unusually noisy picture in color detail. So now we do really need to accentuate the noise by zooming in. Come down here to the zoom part, and you can go at least to 100%. So let's try 100% first. And then let's bring that upper left corner back by pressing the space bar, which gives me the hand tool. I'm going to drag my picture till I'm getting up near the top, and I can see both the sign, the statue, and the sky. And this is a good area for watching noise in this image. In your own picture, you experiment. You want to clearly see the noise you're reducing so you know when you've done enough. Now, it looks to me as though there's a little bit of color in that noise. So I'm going to go back and restore the color noise up to 25, which is about the default that is given there. And if you look, did that make a difference in the sky? You bet it did. If I want to see what it did, take a look over here where I'm indicating. This is how I check what one slider did to my picture. I point my mouse where I have set the point, and I leave the mouse pointer there, but I double click back. Well, I know what it's at 25. If I drag it back and watch the picture, you can see all that color noise reappear. If I want to go back to 25, I can drag or I can type in the number box 25. And when I do that, the color jumps up, and it takes a few seconds to change, but now I've reduced the color noise, and I have some grain up there, but it's nowhere near as much of a nuisance. So I'm going to come up to the luminance slider, and luminance noise is more common. It generally appears as a texture that isn't normal in an area. So I'm going to take that luminance slider, and I'm going to move it up maybe to about 30 and wait for it to catch up and see if I can, that worked. I double clicked on the luminance triangle and went back to the beginning, and I look at it. If I click once without moving my mouse, it pops right back to the place it was. Keep this in mind when you're working in Adobe Camera Raw. If you want to see the before and after effect of one slider, if you keep it there and simply double click on that slider, it'll jump back to the first point. Then all you do is click it back and it pops back to where it was. And you can see the effect. The default is to always pop the luminance detail up to 50. And I normally leave it there. What that does is it tries to protect the area that has detail, because the way noise is reduced is by removing some of the sharpness around the area of those pixels. It will affect your entire image. If you wonder, this time, when you double click and bring that back to the beginning, notice what happens to the bottom of this picture, the scene where the buildings are. I can make it go down. And look at those buildings, then click it back. And you'll notice that you have regained, you've lost a little sharpness by doing it, but it's worth it to clear up that sky where the noise was a problem. So digital noise is in two parts. It's color noise and luminance noise. Every picture will not have any color noise to worry about, and which is why if you have default set on your software, it may always go to 25 in color. And I don't worry about playing with it. If I'm not bothered by the color noise, I leave it at 25 with color detail at 50, and I forget about it. Unless you have an extremely bothersome image where you see a lot of color noise and might need to raise it. And so then what do I do with the luminance noise? I only remove as much as is necessary to make that area bring back to some smoothness. And one of the recommendations that I've received from Matt Klaskowski was he doesn't usually go over 30. And when you set the luminance slider to 30, the luminance detail will pop up to 50 as a default setting, and that works for me most of the time. If I then want to look at my entire image, I go back to the percentage box, and I go back and click Fit in View, and now I'm back to my original. But can you see how it would have been difficult to remove noise at this magnification? If you're not at least 100%, the noise isn't going to be obvious enough for you to notice the right point of getting rid of it. So it's okay to go to 100. If your image still doesn't see it well enough, you can go to 200%. Every time you zoom in further, the noise will be more noticeable. So obviously, I'm not going to go into 500% and try to remove that noise. That is never going to be a problem in using the image. 100% is about what you need finally. To work on it well, it's common to go up a little bit, maybe to 200%. Check it. So at this point, we have done what needs to be done in Adobe Camera Raw. And so once you've done that, you're ready to open it in the editor. People have asked me about the other choices. If I click Done, it'll close the file, but it will remember all the work I've done. And the next time I open it in the raw format, everything will be the same as it is now. But if I want to continue to work on this image, I want to use Open Image. Okay, so I click Open Image, and it will open in the editor workspace of whatever software you started in. Okay? And if you, at this point, want to do anything further with it, you have just the background layer. So I need to warn you that when you do your noise correction in Adobe Camera Raw, it's applied to the base background of your image. So you really can't selectively bring areas back if you think they've had too much noise applied to them. When you do it in Adobe Camera Raw, it becomes part of the very basic settings of the raw data. So if you are using a JPEG, you certainly can open it in Camera Raw and do just what we did. Anytime a JPEG is changed, whether it's in Adobe Camera Raw or in the editor workspace, you will be discarding some information from your file. But we've shown that it comes out better if you make your adjustments in the Adobe Camera Raw interface. than opening directly in the editor and making all your changes here. So my advice to people who cannot do other than JPEGs, that you go ahead and open those JPEGs in Camera Raw and do your basic adjustments of exposure and noise reduction in the Adobe Camera Raw interface. Now that we're here, if we want to keep this and do further work on it, we have a lot of things we can do. I've told you I might still straighten that other, but today's lesson is not on anything but noise and sharpening. So I'm just going to close this, and since I don't need to keep it for future use, I will not save my work. After all, I might want to go back another day and practice over again. And if I have saved it like this, I would have to go back and open the raw to do it. So it doesn't matter. If I come to use this file another day and I'm practicing on noise reduction, I will open the raw file. So in this case, I would just close it and don't save it at all. You don't need this image except for practice purposes. All right, this time we're going to take an image and we're not going to remove the noise in Camera Raw. We're going to use the way it is done if you are in the interface, whether the editor interface, whether you're in Elements or Photoshop. If you want to open it directly there, you do this. So go to File, Open, or we don't want to open in Camera Raw. That's right. So go File, Open. And for this purpose, I have a Keto picture, the same one as a raw, not a raw file, but I converted it to a JPEG. If you click on it once and you get your options open, you better check the format, because if somebody previously opened that in Camera Raw, it remembers that. So you need to go back to JPEG, because I don't want to open this one in the Camera Raw editor. I want to open it in the main editor. So let's go, and with that set to JPEG and Keto 2731 chosen, let's open. So we can see that we have some noise here, and if you want to see it better, you need to zoom in. Take your zoom tool, go up in the upper left-hand corner, click a couple of times. So when I've clicked that into 100%, we can easily see the noise that's there. We're going to use part of Nik software. If you don't have it installed, just search on your browser for Nik software. And when you get to the page, it'll have a download at the top, and you click it, it will download these tools to the download file on your computer. And when you open that file, you'll have an installer. And if you click the installer, it'll immediately set you up to install this software into the software on your computer. So if you only have Elements, that's where it'll do it. If you have both Photoshop and Elements, it'll install it in both of them. And it does it pretty automatically. You just follow and click on. And eventually, these softwares will appear in your editor under the filter choice. So if I go and open that and come down, I'll see the Nik collection. And the one that reduces the noise is defined 2. Before we do that, let me just remind you that Nik software always puts its adjustments on a new layer above the background. So you don't have to add a layer to protect your background. Nik software will do that for you. So let's go back to the filter menu, come down to the collection, come over to Define 2, and give it a click. In a moment, it will open this interface for you. I can make it a little bigger here. And it automatically takes the noise out by that formula built into that software. And I am looking at part of my picture. If I want to look at my whole picture, I come up here to the tools in the upper right corner, and I see the tool that is that zoom tool. If I click on it That's the tool that is in front of me. It's a plus sign. Whenever you want to zoom out, you hold the Alt key on Windows, Option key on Mac, click, and in Define, it will all jump you all the way back to the normal image that totally fits in, so you see the whole picture. And when you do that, you can see what it chose as the places to read the noise. It made a big hunk of that place we looked at that was bad. It also came down to this foreground, which is kind of nasty. And if you look carefully, it picked out one of the brighter areas in the green wall, and it detected some noise there. So it didn't take a big sample from there. It took a smaller sample. And part of what works so well in this noise reduction software is it doesn't equally apply noise reduction to the entire image the same. It will make it more stronger where the rectangle is large, and it'll make the reduction less where the rectangle is small. And as you look, you realize the noise detection is not a big problem in the bright areas. It's a big problem in the shadow areas. So the reason this works very well is it has a formula which chooses an appropriate sample according to the amount of noise found in that area. So I often find I can't do better than the automatic profile. If I have a weird picture and I need to add another area that it did not include, I have the option to measure it manually instead of automatically. If you look over here in the method where it says automatic, if I pop it open, there is a manual choice, and it allows me to add another sample spot by picking up this lovely little control point. It says add a rectangle. And if I felt that it had missed an area that I wanted worked on, if I add another rectangle, I must realize the size of the rectangle I add will control how much additional noise reduction occurs. So if it did a pretty good job, I would not want to add a lot more. So I'd use a small rectangle somewhere else if I felt it was necessary. You know, if I looked at it and said, did pretty well, but I want more noise reduction down here in the bottom, not that I really do, I would pick up the point. I'd come down here, and with my mouse, I would draw a rectangle. And if I make it pretty small, it's not going to add an awful lot of noise reduction, just a little bit more in that area. So now it tells me that I must measure my noise. I've added a new sample spot. So if I click measure noise and I wait, it updates it, and it's a manual profile, and it did a little additional noise reduction. So if you want to see how it looks before and after, all you have to do is take your mouse, and any place I point to will appear down here in the loop. So if I want to see what happens up here in this area that was bad, if you look at the loop, you'll see how it's noisy on the left of the red line and how the noise is reduced on the right. That's the before and after of the noise reduction. If I come down here to a dark area, it's a little harder to see, but I can see it's noisy to the left of the red and not so noisy to the right. Let's come up to the green wall and point. And you know, there's not much difference, is there? And that's because it took a tiny sample. It knew that there was a little noise, but it wasn't much. Consequently, you don't see a big difference from to the left or right of that. And I would expect in the areas that are lighted that I would see some change, but not as much as you will see where the shadows are dark. If I come up into the right corner above the tower and I point my mouse there, I can really see how much improved the noise reduction is. So my feeling is I really like the work done by Define, and I even like the automatic profile it automatically applies. But if I'm starting with a noisy, raw file, it's a good idea to reduce that noise in Adobe Camera Raw. One consideration might be, let's get rid of some of it, but let's not try to make it perfect. And we can do a final noise reduction in Define after it's open here. So if you have a noisy raw file, it's worth getting rid of some of that noise in Adobe Camera Raw. And if you didn't do a complete job, you can finish the job using Nick Software's Define 2. So once I've done that to the picture, and I know it's satisfactory, I'm going to recommend to people in my classes who know how to use masks that they click OK. You get another way of using masks if you hit brush, but I think it is a lot more complicated. So you follow with me this other method that we use for everything else we do. Click OK. It will give you a new layer above the original background with the noise reduction applied to it. Okay? And if I don't see my whole image, I can do Command or Control 0, not O, 0. Hold the Control in Windows, the Command in Mac, type a 0, and it pops open. I could have done the same thing by going to View, Fit on Screen. Can you see the shortcut, Command or Control 0? I find it's a lot easier to do it from the keyboard. But if you're a mouse person, you might like to go up to the View menu to do this. So now I have my whole image. If there was a part of this image that I thought was damaged by noise reduction and didn't really need it, I could get rid of that area. It actually is in pretty good shape, but we're going to get the zoom tool from the top of the tool panel on Elements and the bottom of it in Photoshop, and we're going to zoom in to the palm trees at the bottom. 2 clicks will get them, or maybe even 3. Now, you could look at that and say, I wonder if those trees have lost some of their sharpness because I reduced the noise in them. Personally, I think they look pretty nice in this lighting. But this is how you would remove them from the noise reduction. Look at the layer. If I add a plain white mask, I haven't changed anything because white reveals it all. So go up to the place where it says Add a Layer Mask. In Elements, it's at the top of the Layers panel, and in full Photoshop, all those tools are at the bottom of the Layers panel. But it's a rectangle with a gray circle. Click it. It gives you a mask which is doing nothing because it's white. But it gives you the place that you could selectively reduce or remove the noise reduction from any part of your image if you think it's too heavy and you don't think it's important. So let's pretend that I think it has softened my bushes in the front too much. And I would like to get rid of some of the noise reduction because, of course, what does noise reduction do? It slightly blurs the image. That's how it gets rid of the noise. So how do I make it and remove it from this area? Well, I'm going to paint on a mask, and since white reveals, we remember that black conceals. So I'm going to come over to the tools and grab the brush tool. Coming down to the foreground color, make sure it's black because I want to paint with black. And then I go to the option bar here at the bottom in Elements or way at the top in Photoshop, and I look at the opacity. I'm not sure I want to remove all the noise reduction. I want to reduce it. So if my opacity is at around 50%, I'll get rid of half of the noise reduction applied to those bushes. So let's think carefully. We have a white mask, and the mask has got a highlight around it which says it's the active part of that layer. And I've got a nice brush with black at 50%. I put it over the bushes. If necessary, I can resize the brush. This is a pretty good size. I hold down my mouse and I paint over that part of the picture. Try to stay away from painting over the black at the bottom because it needs its noise reduction. Lift up my mouse and look at the mask. It's got a medium gray on it because I brushed once over it at 50%. If I look at it and think, how did I make any change on it? I want to turn off the mask so I could see the original noise reduction. And then I want to turn my mask back on. And you turn the mask off and on with the Shift key. So hold it down and click the mask. You turn it off. And now those bushes are like they were when they came out of Nick Define. And can you see that I brought them a little sharper? Do it a couple times. Turn it off and turn it on. Turn it off and turn it on. This is a place where I'm quite willing to give up the noise reduction in order to have the detail in the branches. So if there's any place on an image where you think you'd like to reduce the noise reduction and get back a little sharpness, this is the way you would do it. You can do the same thing by clicking on brush, but then you'll have to learn how to read all the things they do to get to this. And the people I work with, we know how to use masks. So you just apply it with OK. And then if you want to mask it out, you add a mask and you paint black where you want to hide the noise reduction. Okay, let's get the full picture back. Command or Control 0. And then you say, what did I do to this image when I applied that Define To layer? Well, if you go to that layer's eyeball, you can hide all the work of that layer by clicking the eyeball. And if you can't see the noise, bring it in by zooming in on it a little bit. There's the noise that was there. Now restore that layer by clicking the eyeball again and see the difference. Noise is most noticeable when you enlarge an image. So if it's going to be projected on a screen and it's going to be pretty big, the noise will be more noticeable. If you're going to print it, it definitely would be more noticeable. So you want to be sure it's removed. And even though I didn't see it at that low percentage, when I increase the percentage to 100%, which closely resembles the way it would look projected, I know now that there won't be a lot of messy noise when I project this image. So let's go back to the full screen, Command or Control 0, and we've done this. If you think it's a value, you're welcome to save it as a PSD because that would keep this. And if I plan to work further on this and eventually do a little sharpening somewhere, I will keep this image as a master file with my PSD format. This is simply a test for you. If you want to work with it later and do something else, you're welcome to save it. Otherwise, just close it and don't save it.